Even if Mike grates on your very last nerve, offer to host Mike more often, not less, so you will have a front row seat to your child's relationship. Make sure your son understands that your expectations for his behavior have not changed, and that your house rules will extend to Mike, but that he is welcome in your home. If you feel the need to make your expectations or house rules exceedingly clear to both your family and their guests, post them on the refrigerator. If your child crosses the line in your own home, make sure you follow through with consequences as well. If Mike does not like the rules in your home, he may choose to leave. But remember, your child is still your child, and the rules in your home apply to everyone you invite in. Having a problematic kid over to your house also gives you the opportunity to get to know the proverbial enemy and understand what you are dealing with. At best, you will find that your son's new friend is a really great person who wants what's best for your son and their relationship. At worst, your suspicions will be confirmed, and you will have evidence you can point to in your discussions with your child about why he is no longer allowed to have that kid over to your house anymore. Offer to drive your son and his friend around. There's something about car trips that elicits unguarded conversation. It's as if the kids forget you are there and open up their inhibitions and conversational topics. Listen and look in the rear-view mirror. Use these visits and car trips as a way to get to know the parents of these friends. You may find that these parents simply don't hold high expectations for their kids, or you may find allies who want the same things for their child that you want for yours. In the end, remember that you do not have the power to change other people's children. You can only make your expectations clear and follow through with consequences when those expectations are breached. Don't lecture. Children, and particularly adolescents, will tune out the moment you start. Take it from a teacher. If your communication style tends toward the lecture, you are going to have to change your style, because you won't be able to force your child to start listening. Ask an open-ended question and then listen. Kevin seems different from your other friends. How did you guys become friends? Would be a great, non-judgmental, non-threatening opener that gently cracks open the door for further conversation. If unsafe behavior is the topic, talk about the safety issue rather than passing judgment on the friends. Kids get defensive and protective of their relationships the moment it seems as if their friends are being attacked. Best to stick with facts and actions as opposed to character assassination. Adolescents have a heightened sense of loyalty and will defend their friends' behavior even when they feel uncomfortable about it. Stick with what you know about your own child's behavior, and if she has acted wisely in the face of a dangerous or problematic situation, make sure to praise her for her judgment and fortitude. A statement such as, "It must have been hard for you to say no to that party last week when you knew there would be a keg. I'm really proud of you for making such an adult decision," offers praise for character and maturity. Once, when I shared my own worries about sending my teenager out into the world, an older mother who had been listening in on my conversation shared her personal light bulb moment, one I've tried to keep with me every time I watch my son head out the door. She said, "One time, my teenage son was going somewhere. I don't know where, and I said on the way out the door, 'Be careful,' as I always had. I then heard my husband say, 'Have fun,' and for the first time I heard the differences in our parenting approaches summed up in that one exchange. My kid had always been a careful kid, and my words, whether I said them or not, were not going to serve as some magic charm over his experience. All he heard was that I did not trust him to be careful, whereas his father did. That was the last time I ever said, 'Be careful,' as he left the house with friends." As we send our kids out into the world, we need to trust them more, and when they live up to our trust, catch them doing things right and praise them. This may require changing your mindset, but keep an eye out for their good judgment, character, and resilience, and let them know that's what you value above all else. Make sure they know that if events spiral out of control and they find themselves in a dangerous or threatening situation, you will help, no questions asked, until the next day. Hold your comments about how on earth they ended up smoking a cigarette at the middle school dance, or in the passenger seat of a car with a drunk driver. Once they are safe and have had a good night's sleep, discuss the specifics of what happened and why. Using poor judgment is part of growing up. If they had the presence of mind to call you for help, focus on the fact that they respected and trusted you enough to say no to a situation they sensed was unsafe. Now, live up to that trust and help them figure out how not to get into that situation again. Model positive and mutually beneficial friendships for your children. Talk about what makes a good friend and why you consider your friends good influences in your life. Ask them how they think their friends describe them. Eradicate toxic and harmful people from your own life before fixing your sights on the toxic and harmful elements in your children's lives, because your example is going to teach them much more about the anatomy of healthy relationships than your words ever will. If, however, all of this careful communication and planning goes nowhere and you continue to have worries about your child's relationships, the time may come when it's appropriate to intervene. First, check your motives. Are you truly interested in the safety of your child, or are you looking for ammunition on kids you fear are bad influences in your child's life? If so, step back, take a breath, and stay out of it. If you are still worried, try these alternatives before snooping and breaking your child's trust. Talk to other adults, the teacher, administrators, and coaches, and find out if the child in question is really a bad influence or a wolf in scary sheep's clothing. Go meet the friend's parents in person and share your concerns. Make sure they are clear on your house rules as well, and feel out their commitment to keep their own kid healthy and safe. Talk to your child about behavior you have witnessed or heard about that makes you nervous. Ask questions and in the process, make your expectations around drugs and alcohol clear once more. If it becomes clear that this kid is a bad influence based on actual evidence rather than fear, limit time with this friend. Keep in mind that this can backfire, and your child may well react poorly to your attempts to control his social life. Find safer, healthier things for your child to do. If you arrange other activities you know he would enjoy, the friendship with this problematic kid may just wither from inattention. If you are still concerned and have done that gut check to make sure your motives are pure and centered on the health and safety of your child, here are some examples of circumstances that warrant snooping. Sudden changes in behavior, personality, weight, sleep patterns, or general health. Changes in your child's communication patterns. If your child is usually willing to share with you, has she stopped doing so? Conversely, if your child never was a big talker, is he suddenly trying to tell you something? If so, make sure you are listening. Evidence of drug or alcohol use, drug paraphernalia, suspicions that your child is drunk or high. Changes in grades or study habits. Hard evidence to back up your suspicions that your child's friends are a bad influence. If any of the above circumstances arise at your home, it might be time to take a look into your child's room, social networks, or simply Google your child's name and see what comes up. Mother, writer, and prosecutor Lonnie Coombs advocates for parental snooping that adheres to what criminal law calls the plain view doctrine. The other possible source of information that isn't an unconscionable violation of trust is stuff left out by your child in plain sight. In criminal law, this is called the plain view doctrine. Police officers are allowed to look at anything they find in plain sight in a location where they have a legal right to be. If you, as the parent and owner of the home, go into your child's bedroom to clean or put away clothes or what have you, and you see things that aren't hidden away, if you have a legitimate concern, it might be okay to look. Finally, if you decide to look, think about what you plan to do with what you might find. If you stumble upon information that needs to be dealt with immediately, such as information that your child or your child's friends might be in danger, certainly act on that information. However, if the information is not life-threatening, sit on it for a while. Give your child time and perhaps he will confide in you. Also allow for the possibility that sometimes, even with proof, you can misconstrue what is happening in your child's life. Use the information to guide your parenting rather than as ammunition in a full-on assault on your child. If your child is in trouble or at risk for dangerous behaviors such as substance abuse, depression, eating disorders, or any number of the pitfalls that come up in a teenager's life, remember that you have the power to align yourself with your child and help him cope. Keep autonomy, love, and support at the forefront of your priorities so as not to risk alienating yourself from your child and losing the opportunity to save him from peril. At the first sign of drug or alcohol abuse, eating disorders, or self-injury, seek professional help rather than attempt to handle the situation yourself. Above all, do not promise your child that you can fix his problems, social or otherwise. You may not be able to, and it's important that your child understands that not everything can be magically remedied with a wave of the parental wand. Some problems are too big for that, and some require complex and imperfect solutions. Fortunately, if parents have done their jobs right, kids will have the competence and courage to face these complex and imperfect solutions. As much as I wanted to grow up as Anne of Green Gables, with a nut-brown-haired Diana Barry as my best friend, I didn't. I had complicated and often fraught friendships with the kids in my neighborhood. We were the fortunate prisoners of each other's constant company, and we had to cobble out our own treaties and lines of demarcation across the boundaries of our comfort zones. This is childhood. Those shifting, hotly contested, and embattled lines, littered with successes and failures, don't just define childhood boundaries. They define the people our children will become. And we owe them the time and space they require to explore those territories. Chapter 7. Sports. Losing as an essential childhood experience. Wherever groups of parents congregate, discussion quickly turns to our children, and a recent breakfast with friends was no exception. The school year was just beginning, and the subject of fall sports came up. I had heard the horror stories before. Sports are too competitive, parents scream at children from the sidelines, and coaches dole out trophies for simply showing up. When the tone shifted from indignant to upset, and the stories took a turn I didn't expect, I finally understood who the real losers are in this era of hyper-competitive sports specialization. Kids who just want to play. Here's one mom's tale of woe, told over that breakfast. I always loved sports, and when I was little, sports were where I established my identity. So I was thrilled when I finally convinced my daughter to get out there and give sports a shot. But instead of finding fun and exercise and identity, she's found that she's too late. Even the recreational league is so intense that the coaches won't work with her or let her play. We tried gymnastics, but those kids have been training since they were toddlers, so that didn't work out either. She wants to try out some different sports and see what she likes, but everything is so serious now that she can't just try stuff out. She's 9. Isn't 9 when you're supposed to be playing a lot of different sports and figuring out what you like to do? This mom was in tears by the time she finished speaking, and the room fell silent. No one had any good suggestions for her, and everyone knew that what she was saying was true. Another mom concurred. It's frustrating because I just want my kids to try out lots of things, learn some sports or dance basics, and have fun, but the machine of youth sports is wound so tight it's difficult to even break in. We don't even live in a particularly intense or competitive community, yet by the time the kids hit 9 or 10, many have been specializing in a sport for a couple of years. The local indoor soccer league actually starts at age 3 with their Tykes League. How about a league called I Just Want to Play? The next morning, I recounted this mother's story to the headmaster of a prestigious Massachusetts independent school. "Oh, that's nothing," he said, shaking his head. "You have no idea how intense youth sports have become." He spent the next 2 hours filling me in on the state of sports in his world. He told tales of ninth graders who have committed to colleges for lacrosse and soccer in clear violation of NCAA recruitment rules. He described high school showcase tournaments in which players attend not out of team allegiance, but in order to showcase themselves for college coaches. He spun tales of parents he has had to face when those verbally committed students come home with a C+, and the parents plead with him to have the grade changed because Brown or Duke or Harvard, take your pick, won't look at him unless he keeps his grade at a B- or higher. One parent begged him to get their son the right set of teachers who would not give him Cs. It used to be that I only had to worry about my high school kids when it came to early sports commitment, said this headmaster. Increasingly, middle school students are being targeted for early recruitment. The Independent School League, composed of 16 New England prep schools, has begun to organize the same sorts of showcase tournaments for middle school students so that secondary school coaches can scout talent among 11 to 13-year-old children. When I talked to administrators and teachers in other schools to get feedback on the details of his story, all I found was further confirmation that childhood sports are no longer about play. A high school basketball coach lamented, "If only my players wanted to do it as badly as their parents do." For many kids and their parents, sports have become as much, if not more, about planning for their college applications than about fun and exercise. Competition for the top spots in high school and college sports is becoming so intense, it's no wonder children are stressed out and under great pressure to perform at younger and younger ages. Dr. Louis Profeta, author and emergency medicine physician in Indiana, who treats these young athletes' repetitive motion stress injuries, wonders why we impose this pressure on our kids and sacrifice so much of what used to define family time. Somewhere along the line we got distracted and the practice field became the dinner table of the new millennium. Instead of huddling around a platter of baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and fruit salad, we spend our evenings handing off our children like 4x200 batons. From baseball practice to cheerleading, from swimming lessons to personal training, we have become the hour-long generation of 5 to 6, 6 to 7, and 7 to 8, selling the souls of our family for lacrosse tryouts. The value of play for the sake of play, the disruption of family time, the unnecessary pressure placed on kids of all ages are all hugely problematic issues when it comes to childhood sports. But we are forgetting that one of the most significant aspects of sports is as an arena to learn about and accept failure. Sports psychologist Terry Orlick refers to youth sports programs as failure factories. And if this is the case, why do we pretend that every one of the 40 million American children who play youth sports should emerge from each game a winner? If kids are inevitably going to face failure and losses in sports programs, why not embrace it? Imagine if sports could be a safe place to fail, where athletes and teams could lose and the aftermath would be all about sportsmanship rather than the conflict over that last contested call or doomsday panic about the child's future. Sports should be the place and time to experience disappointment and failure in a lower-stakes environment, a brief window of time to lay down the foundation our children will need in order to grow into adults of character. Melissa Atkins-Wardy, author of the book Redefining Girly: How Parents Can Fight the Stereotyping and Sexualizing of Girlhood from Birth to Tween, told me the story of her daughter's first failure-ridden day of baseball practice. Amelia showed up for her first day of baseball last night and discovered she is one of 2 girls on a team of boys she doesn't know. She was very intimidated, but she got on her helmet, chose a bat, and went into the batting cage. We didn't realize coach pitch meant pitching machine, we thought it meant a parent lobbing balls across the plate for the kids. Still, Amelia summoned enough courage to get in the cage and take a pitch. She only took one pitch before the tears started, but sometimes that is what courage looks like. Some days, courage looks a lot like failure, except it is the exact opposite. Melissa has learned how to reveal the upside of failure for her daughter, those moments that feel horrible and humiliating when we lose the game or celebrate a goal kicked into the other team's net. Those are moments of courage and growth, and we need to teach our kids to be proud of them. Whether Amelia chooses to return to baseball practice, she's found something valuable in that scary, no-hitter experience. The benefits of sports off the field. Competitive sports can be a great place to discover and learn from these moments of courage that look like failure. In The Parents We Mean to Be, How Well-Intentioned Adults Undermine Children's Moral and Emotional Development, psychologist Richard Weisbord describes the empathy and appreciation that can be developed in children through sports. Competition challenges children to appreciate the skills of opposing players even when they seem like mortal enemies, to find weaker teammates' strengths even when those players are jeopardizing the team's chances of making the playoffs, to take the referee's perspective, at least after the game, even when he or she makes a bad call at a critical moment. That's the kind of demanding morality that helps to develop over time children's capacity to see beyond their own intense feelings, to tolerate others' flaws, to place others' perspectives and needs on a par with their own. Sports also offer parents the gift of time with their children. Most sports participation requires a fair amount of car travel to practices and tournaments, and in my experience, this is where some of the most honest and unguarded conversation with my teenage son take place. So much of parenting is about being there when our kids decide they want to talk to us. I have also found that the more positive and relaxed the atmosphere is in the car, the more often kids will seize the opportunity to talk about difficult subjects, topics that are not likely to come up in the usual course of a stressful, task-oriented, and tightly scheduled day. Here is a place to talk about the ups and downs of what happened at the game or at practice, a place to confide in disappointments, exhaustion, passion, or disinterest. Unfortunately, this is not the case for the majority of families, as Bruce Brown and Rob Miller, two former coaches who now run Proactive Coaching LLC, discovered. Over the course of 12 years, Brown and Miller conducted an informal survey of athletes about what makes supportive and effective sports parents. When Brown asked college athletes, "What is your worst memory from playing youth and high school sports?" their overwhelming response was, "The ride home from games with my parents." Teens across the country are apparently sharing tense car rides home from games with parents who use the hours of travel time to criticize players, second-guess coaches, and deride referees. That's a lot of valuable parenting opportunity wasted, hours that could be used for conversation and the enjoyment of each other's company. In an illustrative corollary to this finding, this study revealed who kids really want at their games, and presumably in the car on the way home: grandparents. Grandparents don't criticize or micromanage in the moments after the game. Grandparents don't critique the coach's strategy or a referee's call. Even in the face of embarrassing failures on the field, grandparents support their grandchildren with no ulterior motive or agenda. So if you want to become the kind of person your child wants to be around after the big game, act more like a grandparent. When your kids have kids, do you imagine your response to a missed goal will be to criticize and berate your grandchildren, or are you simply going to enjoy being around them? My mother is fond of telling me that the most wonderful thing about having grandchildren is that grandparents get to enjoy the fun parts, like watching sports practice, without the anxiety and stress over the grandchild's performance. Try, fail, succeed, she doesn't care. She just wants to be there, cheering her grandchildren on through all of it. Wouldn't it be a relief just to enjoy the fun parts now instead of a generation down the line and let the coach be the one in charge of how your child and his team perform at the big game? It's not an impossible dream. Let the coach be the coach, let the referee be the referee, and when it comes time for your child to play, sit on the sidelines and be the parent. Pressured parents on the sidelines. When parents intensify competition through hovering, yelling, berating, and second-guessing players, coaches, and referees, everyone loses. Kids are miserable, coaches are nearly apoplectic, and all that stress can't be making parents very happy either. If you are one of those unhappy parents, you should know that the monster that emerges on the sidelines lives in all of us and is part of our basic biology. Psychologist Wendy Grolnick refers to this response as pressured parents phenomenon. The PPP is a visceral anxiety triggered when the ever-increasing competition, academic, athletic, social, or artistic, that our kids face today switches on our physiological hardwiring. It's an internal pressure so strong we can't rest until we feel our child is safe, has gained admission to that certain magnet school, or won a spot in the school orchestra, or made the varsity team. The problem with feeling these completely natural feelings, Grolnick explains, is that it alienates our children from us, a result exactly opposite of what we intended. Because ironically, it's the absence of pressure that allows our kids to both remain close to us and to succeed. However, when we see our kids under stress, even if it's just the pressure to hit a pop-fly ball, our fight-or-flight reflex kicks in. Your brain may know your kid is not in danger, but your body goes into high alert mode and cortisol levels go sky high. Once PPP kicks in and our stress hormones start flowing, it can be really difficult to calm down and find the lessons in failure. PPP heightens emotions and our sense of crisis. So in those moments on the sidelines when our parental anxiety and competition begin to spiral, it's especially important to recognize your surroundings for what they are, a game. Put your head between your knees if you have to, but relax. The reason children start playing sports in the first place is to have fun, exercise, and learn the invaluable lessons of sportsmanship and teamwork. This should still be the goal, even when the stakes get higher and aspirations of glory are on the line. Parenting and competition can be a terrible mix, particularly when parents pit siblings against each other. In his book Drive, Daniel Pink recommends that work teams be a no-competition zone. Pitting coworkers against one another in the hope that competition will spark them to perform better rarely works, and almost always undermines intrinsic motivation. Families, like offices and classrooms, are best conducted in the absence of the stress of competition. Competition, in turn, encourages overparenting, even when the competition is for approval rather than trophies or scholarships. In one study, mother-child pairs were told to complete an About Me questionnaire. Half of the pairs were told to complete the form for fun, while the mothers in the other half were told that their children would be meeting a group of kids who would use the form to rate their children. The first group of moms, the ones who had no expectation that their child would be assessed, sat back and watched their child fill out the form on their own. However, the mothers who believed their children would be rated and scrutinized pressured their child to fill in answers that might help the child look good and be liked by the other kids. The very idea that their child would be rated or measured against other children caused those mothers to overparent. Now, imagine these same mother-child pairs 5 or 6 years down the road at the big showcase soccer tournament, watching coaches take down recruiting notes on their children's prowess on the field. College admissions, scholarships, maybe even a career in sports are on the line, and players are in competition with each other. Consequently, competitive hell breaks loose, and these parents take their own anxiety out on the coaches, other parents, players, and their own children. After seeing her 5 children through active careers in amateur sports, One mother admitted to me that she had actively dissuaded her sixth child from going the same route. I just could not take it anymore, she admitted. I had spent years cheering and supporting, and I know that sports are a great way to stay fit and teach teamwork, but I could not take one more afternoon of competitive sniping on the sidelines. The lessons and the trophies are great, and I was happy my other kids got to experience that, but I was done with it all. This mom would be happy to know that even the upsides she recounts, such as trophies and awards, may not be as positive as we are led to believe. Those trophies, medals, and scholarships that we dangle as reward for our children's athletic efforts don't just heighten a sense of competition and anxiety, they undermine drive. Just as rewards for positive behaviors are intrinsic motivation killers in academic and social contexts, they also dampen participation and enthusiasm in sports and other recreational activities. In one study, researchers asked kids ages 9 to 11 to play on a stabilometer, a device that measures balance and had proven to be a lot of fun for kids of that age. Half of the children received a reward for playing on the stabilometer, and the other half did not. A few days later, these kids were asked to come back and play some more, and they were given a variety of options for play, including access to the stabilometer. The kids who had been rewarded the first time around spent less time on the device than the children who had played on it for their own personal enjoyment in the first play session. This is a good example of how rewards diminish enjoyment and motivation even in fun, non-competitive recreational activities without an obvious goal or endpoint. I'm not proposing that we should eliminate competition and rewards altogether. But the practice of giving all children trophies simply because they show up on the playing field is equally harmful to a child's sense of self-worth. Parents need to find their own happy medium between the empty praise of participation trophies and the amped-up competitive drive that sacrifices their child's sportsmanship, performance, and motivation. I asked Hannah Carney, two-time Olympic medalist in freestyle skiing, to describe the ideal sports parent. The perfect sports parents would be ones you never hear from the sidelines. They should be there after the game to be supportive when the heartbreaking things happen. Kids get cut from the team, they get injured, that's just what happens in sports. But the perfect sports parent is there after that heartbreak to listen and help the kid find the positive in the heartbreak. I have to admit, my parents bribed me when I was 10 with a pair of soccer shorts in order to get me to commit to my first week of practice, and I remember the adrenaline of that first goal. From that first goal on out, I was committed to sports, and they were there for me. My mom and dad sacrificed everything for my ski career and my brother's hockey. My mom drove me back and forth to Waterville Valley, a ski area in New Hampshire, and held up my boombox on the mountainside so I could hear my music while I practiced routines, choreographed those routines, and copied pages from my textbooks so I could do my homework when I was traveling. They were supportive, but they never pushed me. After a kid finds a sport they love, it has to be up to the kid to go forward, or it's a disaster for everyone. A Guide to Successful Sideline Parenting. In order to be that parent who can help a kid find the positive in the heartbreak, Carney and the other athletes, coaches, and sports parents I interviewed offer the following guidelines on how to be the kind of parent your kids will want to ride home with, whether from their first T-ball game or a world championship final. Be the parent, not the coach. Unless your child's safety is at risk, don't yell from the sidelines, don't criticize coaching decisions or referee calls in the car after the game, and don't do any armchair coaching in the living room. Feel free to talk with the coach about ways to help your child improve, how your child behaves during practices or games, or ways to troubleshoot issues around injuries, but do not discuss other children on the team strategy, or your own child's playing time. Never, ever badmouth the coach in front of your child. This destroys your child's trust, respect, and faith in his coach and creates a real emotional dilemma for your child. If he agrees with you, he's betraying his coach, and if he agrees with his coach, he's betraying you. Don't put him in that position. Talk to and about the coach only when your child is not around to hear it. Don't ask your child to fulfill your own athletic dreams. It does not matter how talented you were in softball, soccer, or chess when you were a kid. Your kid is not you. Don't be the parent who attempts to relive past glory or play out unfulfilled dreams through a child. You may love baseball with all your heart and soul and put a Red Sox onesie on your child the moment he exits the womb. But as we are not yet engaging in human cloning, your child will have his own desires, hopes, and dreams. Give him a chance to figure out what those dreams are instead of imposing yours on him. Cultivate a growth mindset with plenty of room for failure. Sports are hard and only get harder as kids progress through the ranks. Caroline Gleich, professional skier and extreme athlete, explained that the transition from recreational athlete to professional athlete was hard for her at first because she was operating from a fixed mindset. I really had to change my mindset because my parents had always told me I was great and I'd never had to work at my sport. So with skiing, I thought there were things like ski jumps that I just could not do. I would see other people do these amazing tricks, but I figured I'd never taken gymnastics, so I simply could never do those tricks. I had to shift from what I can't do to what I can do, and I had to really work at it. That became part of the fun, to stay focused on the goal even when things get hard. Gleich has excelled in her sport because she's come to understand that her initial failures are necessary steps toward eventual accomplishment, steps that make the final push to a mountain summit or the top of a glacier all the more rewarding. Know the difference between quitting and failure. It's easy for successful professional athletes to look back on their failures and moments of challenge with fondness. But what if challenges prove insurmountable and it's time to accept the fact that a career or even participation in a given sport is not to be? Michael Thompson, psychologist and author, points out that there comes a time when all of us must decide whether or not the struggle of sports or a relationship or any other path we choose to take is worth the pain. In a broad sense, all learning and growth require struggle. But there is a difference between the experience of struggle that leads to success and the experience of struggle that leads to only more struggle. Not every child is destined to become a professional athlete, and as kids move up through the failure factories toward the more rarefied air of high school and college sports, nearly all of them will have to decide when to throw in the towel. When this happens, parents are tasked with the duty to help our children find the value in the experience of sports, whether that's fun, fitness, or the lessons they've learned in courage, failure, resilience, sportsmanship, and teamwork. These lessons are not lost just because they stop playing the game. I've heard many parents cite, "I can't let my kid be a quitter," or "I have to teach my son that you follow through on your obligations to the team," as reasons to force children to play when they no longer love a sport. However, as K.C. Potts, basketball coach and English teacher, told me, this approach can be a mistake. The tragedy of youth sports is that kids are often signed up with little or no sense of what playing the sport entails, and when the child has the epiphany, "I don't like this sport," the parent opts to invoke the "you can't quit during the season" clause and force the child to stick with it. There is the nobility of following through with a commitment, yes, but often younger children have not really made a commitment, and the parent's insistence brings misery to everyone. To the coach who must find time for a player who does not want to play, to the parents who believe that they are somehow building the character of a child who in their eyes does not have enough, and most of all, to a child who plays not for enjoyment but out of some obligation. Nobody smiles. Nobody wins. Sports are, after all, supposed to be fun. This was the number one sentiment I heard in all the stories shared by successful athletes. Above all, they love their sport and have fun with it, even in practice. Think back to when your daughter played her first game of t-ball. Remember how she had to be reminded to pay attention to the batter while she pretended she was a water buffalo raising a cloud of red dust around the pitcher's mound? How every single player abandoned the infield in order to run down a foul ball? How you laughed about it later over ice cream because the experience and the memories were more important than the final score? That's what sports in childhood are supposed to be about, even if our children dream of Olympic glory or a full ride at Duke. As they progress from team to team and league to league, or give up sports completely, children rely on parents to anchor their family team and provide the kind of unwavering support that can help them through their most humiliating and humbling failures. In those moments, they need us to remind them that as long as they show up on the field and do their very best, in sports or anywhere else, we will keep up our end of the bargain and show up on the sidelines to cheer them on. Chapter 8. Middle School. Prime time for failure. You teach middle school? Really? The question is usually punctuated by a wince and a look of pity. Yes, it's true. I happily spend 8 hours a day in the company of tweens, a much misunderstood and maligned population, well versed in the everyday business of academic and social failures. Even among my peers, educators who understand the joys and rewards inherent in teaching, the middle school classroom is often viewed as educational and professional purgatory. When I asked parents for their positive sentiments about middle school, one mother's submission spoke for the group. I think I need some distance from this era before I find my anecdotes entertaining. I wholeheartedly disagree. Of course middle school students are challenging. They are pupa people whose immature 6th grade selves hardly resemble their eventual 8th grade form. There are days when I can't imagine these mere children will ever be prepared to enter the world on the world's terms. They are demanding, curious, impulsive, and mercurial, and they can be maddening. But these same maddening traits are the very tools that will allow them to navigate the tricky waters of middle school and emerge as more fully formed people. Here's the ugly and wonderful truth about middle school. It's a setup. Middle school teachers ask students to succeed at tasks that their half-cooked adolescent brains are not yet able to master, and therefore, failure is not an if proposition, it's a matter of when. This is one of the first truths I tell my students' parents at back-to-school night, because the sooner they accept this reality, the easier everyone's life will be over the next 3 years. Some kids really love this challenge and rise to it as if it's been what they have been waiting for all their lives, an opportunity to finally have some autonomy and accountability for their own actions. The best part of moving to middle school was the idea that you were responsible for your own actions. In lower school, teachers were always reminding you to hand in your homework, hang your coat up, pay attention, and stay organized. In a sense, 5th grade and before that were just years spent preparing ourselves for the daunting prospect that was middle school, and so to finally get there was rewarding in itself. For kids like this who are ready, the opportunity to have control over their lives is exciting. For others, the transition is not quite so easy. Middle school demands feats of organization, planning, time management, and shifts of focus that young adolescents are not capable of mastering, at least not all at once. Some kids can handle 1 or 2 of these skills some of the time, but for most middle school students, genuine mastery of all of them doesn't come until well into high school. Think about it this way. Infants can't yet speak because their brains are not yet developed enough to master the complex physical tasks of forming language. Toddlers can't plan and execute long-term projects because their brains have not yet made the neurological connections that allow for long-term planning and sequenced execution of complex tasks. We don't expect little kids to be able to do these things, but we do expect middle school students to be able to handle the complexity of middle school, even though they too are still lacking the neurological connections that will allow them to manage the demands we place on them. It can be really hard to remember this fact of middle school life, particularly when, thanks to the vagaries of puberty, some students look like hulking adults by the end of 8th grade. I've taught classes where pre-pubertal baby-faced children study alongside man-sized boys who need to shave every day. Despite all appearances, those physically advanced kids are still children as far as their brains are concerned, and it's important to remember this while we patiently wait for their neurons to catch up with their 5 o'clock shadow. When students stumble into 6th grade on the first day of school, the faculty is ready for them. We spend the first couple of months watching them shove crumpled papers into lockers, helping them pick up the scattered remains of binder explosions, and suggesting ways to remember what class comes after English and what materials to take to science. One mother explains the chaos of middle school this way: "I fear for my hands every time I reach into his backpack. I don't know what is in there, neither does he." Learning to organize, plan, and conquer what's in there takes a concerted effort from students, parents, and teachers, and even I have my moments of doubt. I worry for their future. I worry that I have precious little time to prepare them for the more complicated and challenging world of high school, and can't imagine there will be enough time to get them ready, but there almost always is. Somehow, that chronically late, perennially disorganized 6th grade boy who can't use a planner for 2 days in a row is able to manage his academic life by the time I wave goodbye to him at middle school graduation. So fear not. While middle school demands feats of organization, planning, time management, and shifts of focus that most young adolescents are not capable of mastering at first, they will get there. In the meantime, failure is the name of the game in middle school, so embrace it. Everyone is doing it, even the cool kids, even the kids who look as though they have it all figured out. The stakes are still low, the rate of failure is high, and teachers understand that small disasters happen every hour of every day. So jump in and take advantage of all those learning experiences in the guise of everyday failures, littering the middle school landscape. The name of the game is executive function. The elusive skills they will need to survive in high school and life are part and parcel of what psychologists call executive function, or the collection of skills and mental processes that allow us to manage our time, resources, and attention in order to achieve a goal. There are many skills that make up executive function, and I would argue that the diagnosis executive function deficit is merely a synonym for early adolescence. Failure to engage or access executive function skills is what causes most middle school disasters, such as late assignments, forgotten homework, and lost textbooks. An understanding of this root cause is the first step toward maintaining some perspective on this otherwise frustrating and maddening period in your child's academic life. This understanding also gives you a step up on all those other frustrated parents as they worry and search the heavens for answers as to where they went wrong. Best of all, you will be able to respond to the inevitable failures your child will encounter as a result of executive function deficits, and teach her the workarounds she will need to know in order to avoid repeating her mistakes. While it's tempting to blame executive function deficits on a lack of intelligence, don't go there. They are not related. Executive function skills develop as the adolescent brain develops, and all we can do as teachers and parents is support kids as they learn from their mistakes. Executive function skills develop at different rates, and while some kids acquire them quickly, others continue to have issues well into high school and beyond. It's not coincidental that the students whose parents bail them out and don't allow them to deal with the consequences of these failures develop these skills more slowly. The key to helping kids create the systems they need to gain executive function is to let them fail, Let them feel the pain and inconvenience of their mistakes, and then support them in their efforts to rework the bugs. Try, fail, suffer a little, remedy, try again. Over and over again until they learn. A few missed lunches or a 0 on the homework assignment she left on the kitchen counter will reinforce these skills better than your lectures or nagging ever will. Every intervention or rescue is a lesson lost. They need every minute, every learning opportunity inherent in their failures we can grant them before they face the much greater challenges and consequences that await them right around the corner in high school. While you are waiting for your child's brain to develop, here's a rundown on the collection of skills and habits that constitute the umbrella definition of executive function, plus tips on strengthening those skills and supporting your child while he struggles with solutions and fails in their execution. The struggle for self-control. One lovely spring day, while I was preparing my English class notes and the class was settling into their desks, I felt something whiz past my head and hit the whiteboard behind me. I whirled around, trying to figure out why I was under attack, and realized that someone had thrown a mechanical pencil at me. One glance up at the class and it was obvious who was the culprit. His eyes were wide, his mouth was hanging open, and he was doing his very best to avoid my stare. After class, I took him aside and asked him what he had been thinking. "Well, I wasn't aiming at your head," he said. "I was aiming at the recycling bin." "But a mechanical pencil isn't even recyclable." "No, wait, hold on. Let's back up. What were you thinking just before you threw the pencil at me?" He looked at his feet and shuffled them around a bit. "Nothing." He looked up at me and shrugged again. "I didn't know I was going to throw the pencil until I'd thrown it, and by then it was too late." It was an honest answer. The key to helping kids curb their impulsive behavior is to teach them how to understand their patterns of conduct and the body language that tends to precede these behaviors. We have to catch adolescents before they throw the pencil or paper airplane. Point out their jiggling leg or twitching fingers in order to teach them to recognize these signs as precursors of problematic behaviors. Adolescents are a notoriously self-unaware lot. But if we point out the precursor behavior often enough, they will learn to recognize the signs themselves and redirect their focus. It's not easy. It's one of the greatest challenges teachers face when juggling the needs of 20 or more children at a time. But teaching self-awareness is an important part of helping kids gain control of their own behavior. Even for that kid who threw the pencil at my head. It took every moment of middle school, but even he managed to head off to high school with a pretty good sense of self-control and the ability to recognize when he was beginning to lose it. There were plenty of failures along the way, but I like to think his teachers and parents helped him find a lesson in each and every one of them. Here are some techniques that can help kids gain some self-control and awareness of their own patterns of disruptive or distracting behaviors. Agree on a signal. For some of my students, a light tap on the shoulder is all they need in order to regain focus and composure. Before class, when the mood is light and the student is feeling positive, I take her aside and propose that we come up with a mutually agreed-upon signal. It can be a word, a tap on the shoulder or head, a look, whatever the student wants. When I notice the student losing focus or beginning to show signs of an impending impulsive behavior, I take a casual stroll around the room and invoke our signal. It's an amazingly effective strategy, one that can work at home as well. It saves the child from embarrassment and can be a way to communicate without nagging or shouting. The pencil game. Child psychologist William Hudenko taught me a technique that can help kids learn how to recognize signs of impending impulsive behaviors and then signal their brain that they need to refocus. Give the child a set of 2 or 3 pencils and teach him to switch pencils when he feels his brain getting distracted. Now, it's not really about which pencil he uses, but switching pencils gives his brain the prompt, "Oh, I'm distracted. I need to get focused again," and switching pencils becomes the signal for his brain to refocus. Eventually, he won't need the pencils because his brain will learn to recognize distraction and he will begin to automatically redirect his focus. But in the beginning, the pencils offer a way to become conscious of subtle signals of distraction. Fur. If your child is apt to lose those pencils or is loath to carry prompts around with him, Houdenko suggests another technique he calls FIR, which stands for flag, eye contact, and rehearse. Flag, according to Houdenko, means to figure out what's important to pay attention to. For instance, if a teacher is talking in class, the student should listen for the highlights he thinks are important. Eye contact means, literally, that he should be making eye contact with whoever is speaking. Finally, rehearse means to repeat or rehearse the important points in his mind, so they will get moved from short-term to long-term memory. This process is really for attention issues, but it also gives the student something to focus on, which helps head off impulsive behaviors. All of these techniques will take time, practice, and patience, and there will be lots of failures along the way. The important thing to remember is that talking about the process of being in control and coming up with a plan such as the pencil game or FIR will at least set the stage for an awareness of this issue. Limbering up for mental flexibility. If I were to walk into my son's room while he is deep into the construction of an imaginary kingdom and announce that we will be departing in 5 minutes for an amusement park, he'd complain about having to stop playing with his blocks. It's not that he doesn't want to go to the amusement park. He would not hear what I was saying. All he would hear was that there would be a change, and he wouldn't like it. It would take him a minute or two to make the switch from blocks to roller coaster. At 5, this cognitive inflexibility is par for the course, but once your child gets to middle school, he's going to have to learn how to switch mental gears many times a day. One of the most difficult transitions for middle school kids is the shift from home to school. Adolescents, and particularly young adolescents, need quite a bit of time in the morning to wake up and prepare for their day. When your child barely makes it to school on time, he is being put at a major disadvantage. Kids really need a good 10 or 15 minutes to empty their backpacks, reorganize their materials, talk to their friends, adjust their outfits, and get their heads on straight before first period. Without this time of transition, that first class is a nightmare for them. Their brains, bodies, and belongings will be disorganized, and many of these kids don't really pull themselves together until lunchtime, when they get a moment to breathe, unpack, and arrange their priorities for the day. Once he is at school, he will have to move between classes and subjects, reorient his brain from math to French, switch out his materials in his locker, and adjust to various teachers, all with their own rules, expectations, and personalities. A simple illustration of this sort of mental inflexibility arose a few years ago when my 7th grade Latin students came to my class straight from French class. The word "and" is spelled the same way in both languages, et, but it is pronounced in French and et in Latin. Students who never mispronounced were suddenly dropping their T's all over the place when they arrived straight from French. It became a running joke that year, and when they graduated to 8th grade and Latin no longer followed French, the mistake disappeared as if it had never existed. Even after they survive the many transitions in their school day, kids are then faced with shifting gears between one extracurricular and another. They must navigate the mental leaps from soccer practice to homework to dinner to television to reading to bed. If they were not already exhausted from the school day leaps, they certainly will be by the time their heads hit the pillow. The sheer mental exhaustion of these leaps of focus, paired with the massive amounts of academic, physical, and social data adolescents are expected to assimilate and process every day, serves as yet another reason kids should be getting plenty of sleep. Here are practical guidelines for helping your child manage transitions. Create some predictability in your household. Continuity and predictability aren't just reassuring for toddlers. Stability calms adolescents as well. Keep a family calendar and try to remind kids of appointments and schedules, particularly if a change in the routine is on the horizon. Kids should keep their own schedule as soon as they are able. When kids are aware of and organize their own timetables, they will gain a sense of autonomy, and that will push them toward greater independence. Keep your child on a regular sleep schedule, even on weekends and vacations. Studies show that it takes a long time to recover from even a small shift in sleep routines, and sufficient sleep is key to almost every aspect of developing executive function. When unexpected changes come up in the family's schedule, model calm. Children feed off adult cues and learn how to manage stressful situations through their parents' examples. If you handle transitions with grace, they will be much more likely to emulate that grace. That poor working memory. If you know anything about computers, think of the working memory as RAM. Or think about the mind of a dog. My Labrador Retriever can hold one task in her mind: retrieve the paper, for about 2 seconds, or until some other task enters her brain: chase the squirrel. This deficit is not her fault, and it's not because she's stupid, although she is. She has poor working memory. Similarly, when I ask my son to feed the dog while his brain is occupied with guitar practice, he will walk into the kitchen and stare blankly at me, and I can tell that in the time it took for him to walk from his room to the kitchen, he's forgotten what I asked him to do. While this behavior is irritating, it is also completely normal. A gentle reminder, best if it's handed over without irritation or judgment, will get him back on track. A lack of working memory isn't just annoying at home, it's a real problem for kids in school. Teachers tend to give students oral information, and if the student can't keep that information in mind long enough to write it down in her notebook or planner, that information is lost forever. Or until the student asks the teacher to repeat it and gets a dirty look for not listening the first time around. When I give my students an assignment, I try to look them in the eyes and wait until they are paying full attention. Even then, I will inevitably have to repeat the assignment a couple of times, particularly if it contains specific details such as page numbers. In order to retain my sanity, I write it down for them on a chalkboard. Between the oral and visual command, the assignment will usually make it into their plan books. Here are some practical strategies for middle school kids with poor working memory. Have your child's hearing tested. Hearing and working memory are unrelated, but kids with hearing deficits often look a lot like kids with memory impairment, so go ahead and check that off the list first thing. Be patient. Repetition is key, and even though that can get old really fast, try to remember that you are dealing with a developing brain. Write tasks down so your child can refer back to your instructions. Post refrigerator chore charts or checklists of tasks to be completed. I'm a huge fan of kid-generated checklists because if kids create the list, the act of writing it down helps solidify the items in their memory banks. If you like word games and have some time on your hands, create mnemonics to help kids remember information, such as the order of tasks involved in doing a load of laundry or in loading the dishwasher. Enlist your child's help in devising these mnemonics. It's more fun that way, and again, the more involved he is in drafting these steps, the more ownership and autonomy he will have over the task. If your child's school allows it, look into audio recording classes, particularly on test review days or in classes that rely on lectures to convey information. Keep instructions simple. If you are trying to teach your child how to do the laundry, spend one session on sorting and laundry cycles, and save the lesson on spotting stains for later. If necessary, post a checklist on the wall next to the washing machine and have him check the steps off as he completes them. Teach your child critical listening skills. Part of improving working memory is filtering out all the stuff kids don't need to remember. If you listen to the news on the radio on the way to school, ask your child, what do you think were the two most important ideas in that story? This skill will really pay off down the road as kids get older and the amount of information they are expected to assimilate increases. Awake, but not necessarily aware. Adolescents have a lot of trouble looking at their own efforts and gauging their results against what is being required of them. Middle school teachers know that in order to receive the results we want from our students, we need to be clear about what we expect, repeatedly. I try to be precise and painfully detailed about every aspect of my expectations because if I am not, I risk frustration and eventual mental collapse in the face of the chaos that will ensue on due dates. When I do receive assignments that fall short of my explicit instructions, I sit down with the student and give her examples of where and how she fell short. I'm specific about expectations going in and specific about how I will evaluate those expectations going out. At home, deficits in self-awareness and monitoring may show up as shoddily executed bathroom cleaning or lunches packed with little more than Cheetos. In my house, the problematic task is cord wood stacking, an adventure in frustration that led to a house rule that if the wood pile falls over, the person who stacked it has to do the job all over again. Wood stacking is an exhausting and splinter-prone job, so it only took 1 or 2 stack collapses for my older son to perfect his wood stacking technique. But let me repeat, adolescents require detailed and explicit guidance on their execution of a given task. I did not just send my kid outside with an IKEA-esque instructional packet or some loose oral directions. I stacked with him. I taught him how to properly form support towers at the end of the stack, account for the angle of the ground underneath the pile, and compensate for unevenly split wood. He gained an education in wood stacking, and I scored a day with my son, watching as he earned a sense of competence in the completion of a complex and challenging task. Here are some tips for shoring up adolescents' self-awareness and their ability to gauge their progress on tasks. Make expectations crystal clear from the get-go. Ideally, model the task with them the first time they attempt it, and talk about tricks and tips for getting the task right. When kids claim they are finished with a task, help them compare your or teacher's expected outcomes with their actual outcomes. If they make mistakes or fail at the task, teach them step by step how to remedy the situation. The way to capitalize on failures is to turn them into an education in resourcefulness and remedy. Sometimes, the failure becomes a lesson in and of itself in another skill. Go with the flow and teach the lessons as they emerge with patience and a sense of humor. Praise effort while supporting future improvement and view mistakes as opportunities to learn. The more kids learn how to look at their own work and measure it against external expectations, the better they will get at measuring their own progress and working up to those expectations. Failure to launch. Kids of all ages struggle with the ability to start and get down to work on new tasks, and while this fiddling and fooling around in the face of something new looks like procrastination, psychologists call it initiation, and it's an essential executive function skill. To initiate means to begin, to overcome entropy, launch a plan, and get down to a task. This won't come as news to any parent of an adolescent, but young teens can have trouble originating an idea, coming up with a plan for a task, and getting down to that plan, all part of executive function. Nagging seems to have the opposite of the intended effect, and this inability to initiate tasks has delayed many a school project. Sometimes it's about not being able to recognize how much time a task will take in relationship to the amount of time that's left to complete it. Sometimes it's simply a matter of inertia. Most little kids don't initiate tasks until an adult tells them to, but as those kids get older, it will be important to transition them toward a place of independence, where they initiate and complete tasks under their own power. Here are practical tips for helping kids initiate and follow through on tasks. A clearly and carefully maintained daily, weekly, and monthly calendar is vital. Much of understanding time management flows from a clear picture of how much time there is in a day and how a specific task fits into a schedule with real deadlines and time pressure. Talk about time management. If a child needs to complete 3 tasks before bedtime, talk about how long each task might take and how much time remains in the day. Timers and alarm clocks can work miracles. Set a timer for when one task needs to end and another should begin. That way, it's the timer, not the parent, who is the nag. If the child can watch the time run down, that's also helpful in that it makes time a real rather than an abstract concept. Again, model what you hope to teach. Show your kids how you budget your time. Let them see the wizard behind the curtain and understand how running a household and work life really happens. Help them understand that fully cooked meals don't just materialize in the half hour before dinner. Explain the process. Figure out how long it will take to plan, shop, defrost, prep, and cook that meal, and then invite them into the process. Organizing for learning and life. Okay, this is a biggie. Most students enter middle school with unformed organizational habits and resort to this mother's description. My 7th grade son's idea of organizing his school papers is to stuff them into his locker or backpack. Every now and then he loses something important and has to complete an archaeological dig through crumpled, torn, shredded papers and tests that would be better served in papier-mâché projects. There are some practical strategies you can try in order to help your adolescent become more organized. But even if you work as a professional organizer, mastering this executive function skill is a process, not an item on a checklist to be dealt with over the short term. Many of these skills are learned over a lifetime, so adolescents are probably only going to master the rudimentary skills at first. The goal here is not perfection, but the acquisition of basic skills and strategies that will allow them to keep their papers in order, know where their test review sheet went, and understand how much time they have to study for next Friday's Latin test on the imperfect tense. This happens through trial and error, with an emphasis on the latter. If your child's school does not teach study skills, he is going to have to learn this essential curriculum at home. Work with your middle schooler to come up with a method for organization and planning. For example, every Wednesday my students are required to empty out their lockers, organize their papers, and get a locker check. Some of the more disorganized students are asked to take their binders into homeroom and spend 10 or 15 minutes filing away loose papers and recycling the redundant paper that seems to accumulate in the front pocket of the binder. Often, students will find that they have 3 copies of one assignment, the original and the 2 they were given as replacements when they were positive that it was lost forever because they looked for it everywhere. If your child's school does not encourage this practice, have him set aside 15 minutes a week at home to clean out and file loose papers. As your child learns to organize his materials, he won't need this extra time anymore, but 15 minutes in the beginning is about right. One middle school student mentioned this weekly check-in as an important part of her organizational routine. The thing that most helped me stay organized was the weekly locker checks. It was a time in the week where you were forced to organize yourself and your whole locker and backpack. That was so helpful because it was a reserved time in the week to actually clean out your locker, throw away the loose papers in your backpack, and find the odd sheet of homework that you never handed in. Usually, we would never have had the self-discipline to actually take some of our own time and sort ourselves out. In addition to the weekly clean-out, we also schedule some planning time once a week. Every Monday morning, we spend some time filling out plan books and transferring assignments from teachers' weekly sheets to their own calendar. My school hands out a plan book specific to our calendar at the start of every year, and middle school students are required to keep it up to date, noting all assignments and special events. Any calendar will work, though, and you should be checking over their shoulder at first in order to make sure assignments are being recorded. I make sure my students list in the appropriate boxes the name of their classes, or even better, an abbreviation that leaves lots of room for other notes, so when they need to flip to next Tuesday's French class to fill in an assignment, they can find it. The most important point here is that students should be in charge of their own schedules by the time they hit 6th grade. They will need a couple of years to get used to this process, and some time to try out a few different systems to see what works for them, so give them that time. Pushing this time management responsibility off until high school or college is doing your kid no favors. This isn't an ability that magically appears when he needs to take on the management of his own life. It's a skill that takes practice, trial and error, and patience. Whether your child's school has a strategy or you are flying solo at home, choose a time to organize once a week. For really bad organizational cases, I have been known to check in on binders a couple of times a week, but a home check once a week should work. While this presents another opportunity for conflict, try to frame it as a way to see what your kid has been up to over the week. If all else fails, make it clear that you only have to do this irksome task together until your kid has a handle on his own organizational abilities. If getting mom's nose out of a teenager's business isn't an effective reward for positive habits, I don't know what is. A sense of humor is essential in dealing with this task. I have one student who asks me for a locker check every week, confident that he will be given the go-ahead on the first try, free to head on out and play on the basketball court. I don't know where he gets this false sense of confidence because every Wednesday for the past 2 years, his locker has been an unmitigated disaster. I point and say, "What about those papers? What are those?" Or I remove his science textbook from the locker, hold it by the binder, and shake, only to have loose folded paper flutter to the ground by his feet. This is our regular routine. He knows I am going to hold his binder by the spine and allow gravity to reveal which papers are secured and which are not, but every week he's sure he has the task in hand. Believe it or not, this weekly date with his binders has become one of my favorite parts of the week. We find mangled papers, realize they were due yesterday, and together we devise plans to ensure he won't make the same mistake next week. As he slowly learns, fails, then relearns expectations, we have laughed and rolled our eyes. While I will be thrilled when he finally masters his binders, I will miss that weekly bonding opportunity.
This is the end of the disc. The audiobook continues on the next disc.